Hello, everyone. Do I need to use the mic? I guess I do, right? Hello. I'm Fraser Muggeridge, and I suppose I'm the last warm-up act. This is like a big festival. I'm the second in command to introduce Jeremy. Welcome to the Inside Out lecture. And it's not welcome to the shit show, it's welcome to Inside Out. And as previous people have said, this program invites speakers, leading thinkers, talk about work, practice, thought, and collaboration. There's obviously, as you know, it's been previously mentioned, there is a little show at White Column, which is up in Broadcasting Place, and big thanks to Mathieu and Tom Rogers for installing this with the students of the MA in Fine Art. So I'm just going to show a few little slides of the work I've done with Jeremy over the years, and I suppose what's really interesting is it's a kind of collaboration between two very distinct types of practice. Jeremy's an artist, I'm a graphic designer. My kind of real interest is in typography. So my work, I'm going to show a few examples of the things I've done with Jeremy. My work really is production and graphic design or typography as production. And that's a maybe a slight controversial statement because, you know, as a graphic designer, I feel that I don't have too much to say to the world. So I'm interpreting someone else's message. So all these messages are Jeremy's message. My role is to advise on typography, is to work out that the Frankie says relax, which is then twisted into Frankie says fuck Brexit, is the right typeface, is not just a cheap pastiche, is really on the money as in terms of what the typography is. And of course, some others, you know, maybe this is a bit of a graphic design joke that we threw in, John, Paul, George, and fuck Brexit. Sometimes projects have kind of veered into collaborations. This was a project that we did in lockdown, and again, it was a message that Jeremy texted me on his phone one day during lockdown, and my response was, let's produce a poster. Let's produce a poster to raise funds for the Trussell, was it called the Trussell Trust? Yeah, the Trussell Trust and Refugee Action, to make a poster that people would put in their windows that would look good. So my job was to produce that and also to make that happen. So that's also something that's you know, very much part of what I do, is make things happen. So of course, if you sell a lot of posters, we actually sold over 2,000 in about one day. You actually then have to realize that you actually have to order 2,000 tubes, and they have to be delivered, and someone has to roll them all up. And my studio became a warehouse for a few weeks. But of course, they went out into the world. They went out into windows during lockdown. Maybe you even bought one. They went out on doors. They went out on fridges. They also went out in projections in Barcelona. They also got translated into different languages, into different techniques, and recently a kind of street version poster of it in Melbourne, Australia. You know, some more graphics. Again, Jeremy's work, as you'll see, is many things. Sometimes there might be some graphics for a film. Sometimes there might be some graphics needed for a show. And again, that's what we often do together, is this kind of interplay of typography and graphics. And sometimes that can be, a bit trashy. So welcome to the shit show, and welcome to Jeremy Deller. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Fraser. I think. So what? I'm exhausted already seeing all this stuff. I don't know about you, but I'm just going to talk about. I don't even know for how long things I've been doing. The last 30 years now, amazingly, and weave in some of the things that Fraser was talking about, but just talk about how it was I end up here talking to you. Even though I didn't study art, I didn't go to university to study art. I studied art history at the Courtauld Institute, which you may know is a very august and backward, as it was then, institution in London in terms of how it taught art history. So I did that. I didn't have a kind of traditional upbringing in terms of making art. But I did make things. Weirdly, I went to I was unemployed for quite a long time after leaving college, and I went to London College of Printing, as it was called then. Now it's called London College of Communication, where if you were unemployed or low-waged or retired, you could go 1 or 2 days a week and use the silk screen studios for free, more or less, and use as much as you want of their resources in the silk screen studio. So I went there and I made lots of prints and posters, and they also had a room in the London College of Printing where they had 10 computers, 10 of those Macs on towers, the tiny little ones, and I started making little prints and posters and stuff. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then in 1996, I had an idea that basically liberated me from making prints and posters, even though I've kind of gone back to it with Fraser. I've done tons since, which was to basically have a brass band play acid house music. So it was an idea, a sort of semi-joke idea that I thought could work as a real thing in the world, as an artwork, even though there's no product as such. There's nothing to touch. It was just a thing happening as a performance. And so I had this idea, and this diagram came into my mind almost immediately, a way that this project of this brass band playing this music actually told a story about Britain and about history and about how music and history and social history are totally intertwined, or can be. And so really this is a portrait of, some of it, in a sense, is a portrait of Britain in the 20th century, of what happened, the changes within Britain, which we'll come back to, actually. So this diagram was made, but it's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to actually do it. And this is a performance by the band as a music festival. And it was an amazing thing to do, to work with the public, because before then I hadn't really thought about doing that. And the ease of which to make this project with the public shocked me. With the band, I thought it was going to be very complicated to convince them and then do it. But actually it was a very, very smooth process. And the band still perform it, and last couple of weeks ago in Australia it's performed by lots of different bands. So it has a life beyond me. I don't have any control over it anymore. When they make performances, I don't have any say over what they do and whatnot, which is fine. So it's out in the world effectively. But it was a revelation, and it totally changed the way I wanted to work. Because after then I just thought, why am I making these things? I should just be working in the world effectively, doing things in public, which is what I was then really concentrating on. That's probably what I'm known for more than anything else. So this photograph was taken 40 years ago today, and about 35 miles from here, at Orgreave, just outside Sheffield. I'm kind of whizzing around a bit, really, but I suppose now I'm going to talk about a project that I'm known for more than anything else. I've just done a book with Fraser, and the chapter about this work, which is called The Battle of Orgreave, is called My Stairway to Heaven, which will mean something to some people but nothing to others, because it's the piece of work I will always have to talk about, or I always will talk about, or will be remembered for. If I'm remembered for anything, it will be this. And it's a reenactment of what happened that day just outside Sheffield in the miners' strike, when 15,000 police and striking miners, maybe more even, met on a field, and there was a massive confrontation, which I saw as a 18-year-old on TV, and it's stuck with me ever since. And even from that day onwards, I'd never stopped thinking about it, about what really happened there, because it looked like a set-piece battle from medieval times or Roman times even, with the way the police tactics were and the way they kind of cleared the field and then pursued miners through a village. It looked like a rout, and it looked very strange for it to be happening on British soil. And so I wanted to revisit it as a project and remake it in the actual place, and for it to be like a public piece of performance art with thousands of people reenacting this huge confrontation, which was a very key moment in the strike. So I spent 2 years talking to people in the area, maybe 3 even, getting people's trust, but also just finding out about what really happened that day. And I worked with Art Angel, who I'd suggested this project to. They had an open call, and I sent in literally 3 sentences saying I want to remake this. I didn't think it was actually possible to do it, but it was kind of a challenge to them. And they said, yes, let's do it. And so I was faced with this sort of quandary. How would you go about recreating a riot? But we did it, and we can talk about it afterwards with questions. There's a lot to talk about. This is an image from the second half, which was basically a pursuit through a village. And we had 1,000 people doing it. So we had local people, former miners and their families, but also members of reenactment societies. And I was very interested in reenactment societies and the way they view history, their view of British history especially, and the great canon of battles on British soil. And I wanted this to be one of them, like a Civil War battle effectively. So people that do this, which of course you know what this is, don't you? This is Sir John Codrington slaying the Duke of Alençon, who's just killed the Duke of York. It's so obvious. And this is the world of reenactment. It's a very odd world in some respects. The people that do it, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are quite right-wing. They're quite conservative, with a big and a small C. So I was interested in these groups of men meeting together on a field on a rehearsal day, the day before we did this, and just seeing what they made of each other. And we had about 600 reenactors and 300 former miners and family, local people who were sympathetic to the miners, effectively. And of course, what happened was there was quite a lot of tension, because the reenactors, a lot of them, still believed what they'd read in the papers in 1984 about the enemy within and so on. And so they were very wary, if not scared, of the miners. And even though there were more reenactors than miners, as soon as the miners or former miners got on the rehearsal field and were just hanging out, for some it was the first time in 17 years, 16 years they'd seen their mates or people they recognised. There was they locked into this incredible camaraderie and, if not love for each other, which totally intimidated the reenactors. They'd never seen anything like it before. Also, they'd never reenacted a battle within living memory where veterans of that battle were in the reenactment. So all these things were very unsettling for the reenactors, which was, for me, what was interesting about the project. It was a kind of experiment. What would happen if this plus this, what would you get? So there was a lot of tension, which actually made the reenactment a lot more realistic, because it had emotional realism, which most reenactments will never have. So for me, this was effectively a reenactment, a kind of recreation of a crime or a crime scene, in the way that police do that a lot. It's a kind of post-mortem, an autopsy, all those things. And it was a public event. It was very important that the public would witness this and see it. And I know a lot of contemporary art is about healing wounds and catharsis. That's what, that's how it's spoken of, that's how it's justified. For me, I was not interested in that. I wasn't interested in making people feel better about the strike or themselves even. It was definitely a kind of unpleasant artwork in a lot of ways in terms of what we were showing. It was a comprehensive defeat for the miners for a start. So it was really about looking at a wound and digging around in it rather than trying to heal it, which I know is sort of maybe an unfashionable thing to say. And also, we had no aftercare after. I mean, this is the question that always comes up now, what did you do after for the former miners who'd been through this? Well, we had nothing. And even at the time, I thought there might be something provision for them. But all we had was a tent with £200,000 in cash in the tent, and everyone was being paid for their 2 days' work, and that was the aftercare, weirdly, being paid. So it was a complex project in a lot of ways. A lot of people thought it couldn't happen. I think if you did something like this, and I was thinking about this, if you did something like this now and people found out about it, I think you'd get a lot of shit online. I think you'd be harassed and harangued online a lot before it happened. Weirdly, up in Sheffield and the mining areas, they kind of got it. They met me, we had meetings, they got the measure of me, and they understood why I wanted to do it, because I told them. But when I went to London occasionally occasionally I lived there, and spoke to people about what I was doing, some of them were absolutely horrified that I was doing this. They thought it was the most terrible idea you could do. And I can understand why, because there's a lot of humour and absurdity built into this. It could have ended up as like total, and it was live as well, remember. We didn't stop, it just happened. So it could have just got out of hand, or it could have just become like comedy. Luckily, neither of which happened. And I think a lot of my work has that within it, or some of it. Any work you make in the public realm, any work you make with the public, or with where you're at the elements, literally the weather, you're at the mercy of the weather, has the potential just to disintegrate into comedy or violence or both. So I was lucky, I got away with it, and it was deemed to be a successful work. Now this diagram that you saw at the beginning, weirdly, has sort of followed me around for years. I was asked in 2018 to make a film about London clubs in the 80s. 15-minute film, which just sounds horrific, actually. I spent most of my time in the 80s being turned away from clubs in London, so I wasn't really that interested in that. But then I thought about this diagram, and I thought maybe I should make a film about this, about Britain, and about dance music in the 80s in Britain, and about how it changed the country, 80s and 90s. And it wasn't going to be 20 minutes long. You can't do justice to this subject, such a huge subject about social change and popular culture, that it has to be bigger than that. So I made a film called Everybody in the Place, which is basically a film about these changes in Britain from mid-80s onwards. Social changes, but also how music reflected it, or maybe even how music pushed it, how it changed Britain. And the format was a school, in the sense that I was a teacher for a day, teaching young people, talking to young people, I don't know if I was teaching them, about Britain as I saw it in that era, that time, showing them footage, a lot of archive, long clips of archive, about the traveller movement, about Stonehenge, about raves, about government, and getting their impression, and about the miners' strike. And these are some of the students. It was at a school in London. Really by chance, I'd gone there and given a talk, and I really liked the young people. I thought they were really fun. Most of their parents were not born in the UK, so not atypical of a school in central London. It wasn't a private school, it was a state school, or probably around here even. So their parents were from Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan, Kosovo, etc., North Africa. So they had no folk or family memory of Britain in the 80s, because their parents were elsewhere. And so for them, it was very interesting for them to see footage of the miners' strike, footage of the traveller movement, because it's kind of ancient history in a way. And so their reflections upon it are totally what you might not expect. This is one of the young people. There's a clip of some travellers being paraded through sort of Market Square in Salisbury. They've all been arrested. They've been trying to get to Stonehenge. So, we would call them crusties maybe, or travellers. Whole groups of them all handcuffed going into the courts on Market Day in Salisbury. And there's a couple looking really angry. And I paused the film. And I think most people here, I asked the question, what do you think they're going to say? Most people here, and I would have said, they're disgusted with these young people. But they don't. They say, this is disgusting what we're doing to these young people. They're like blacks in South Africa, how we're treating people here. It's like apartheid. And they go on and on and on. And then there's an older guy even who speaks about them, saying they should be left alone. And of course, it's the war generation. It's the people that grew up in the 1930s and saw what happened in countries where there were totalitarian fascist regimes, and they had to fight a war to prevent that. And now similar behaviour was happening in Britain. So it's a very interesting film. So it sort of turned things on its head for me as well. During the film, we had a moment where the young people got to play on some equipment that was available then, but made the music, which was a lot of fun. So there's a kind of practical element. I'm going to show you the trailer, which is very exciting, 1 minute 30. The film isn't as exciting as the trailer, but it gives you all the elements that we used in the film. So it gives you an idea of what the film is about. This is the first time I'm trying to use the... Let's see if it works. Fraser did the titles. And we had some diagrams as well in the film that Fraser did. He didn't do that. Yes, it was sponsored by Gucci, in case you want to complain about that afterwards. We can talk about that. Let me get the next slide up. There we go. It does work. So this image, it's a club. It's Shelley's, Stoke, very, very famous club. And the film was about Britain. It wasn't about London. Because the interesting things and change in the UK often happens outside of London. And so it was a film about Britain, and there's a section in the film where the young people in the classroom stand up and just say the name of a club that wasn't in London, that meant a lot to the people there, but also in a way redrew the map, in my mind at least, at what Britain was. So when I heard about, if you heard about a town like Stoke, I would have thought about this club, because it was like this legendary nirvana of music. And this is the cue at Shelley's, which got me thinking about if I do this film again, which I will never do, obviously, made me think about these images. These are images, some of the earliest footage of working class people in Britain, of them leaving factories or arriving at factories to work, which is basically a way of getting lots of faces on film in a very efficient way. And then you film the people leaving or arriving, and then 2 weeks later or a week later, you show the film in the town to the people, and they pay to see themselves on film. I mean, God knows what that must have felt like or been like to be in a cinema or a music hall to see yourself. It must have been unbelievable, the experience and the noise for people to see themselves like that. And that got me thinking about this. These are people going in to do something that isn't work necessarily, but often it was in factories and former warehouses, which are the sites where their ancestors had gone to work. So there's all these things. Also, you film a queue at a nightclub for similar reasons you film a factory, is you get all those faces of people, you make them wait and queue up, you film them, you make a film of the evening, and then a week later they play the VHS tape of their time of the previous week at the club or previous fortnight at the club, which is quite interesting. Also, just looking at these two pictures, the young people in this queue are barely out of being children, I would say. They're probably from the age of like 13, 14 upwards. You see them in the club and they look like these huge epic figures, and then you see them in the queue and they're like that tall, some of them. So it's very, for me, this combination is very real and alive. So in the film, there's a whole section about Stonehenge, and that's, I grew up going to not lots of stone circles, a few, I think because they were free. So my parents liked going to places like that. And, you go around a burial chamber and, all that kind of stuff. And it's very exciting, for me at least. So it's always been something I've done. I grew up within a museum, a very kind of vague museum culture in London, because it's what's there. And again, they're free. And so you'd go to them a lot. I live near the Horniman's Museum. I don't know if you know that. Sort of like a Pitt Rivers style museum, but with other collections as well. So very fascinating for a child. I wasn't into sport, so that museums were my sort of go-to places, effectively. So that's why I'm quite at ease working within them and creating shows within them and going to them, of course. So Stonehenge. Yeah, oh, wow. Oh, that's the footage. That's interesting. That's we won't have time to show it, but that's the footage from Salisbury. But anyway, so Stonehenge for me is the kind of most contemporary building in Britain. There's no other building or structure that is always in the news, always controversial in some way. I mean, in 2 days' time, there'll be 20,000 people there celebrating solstice. It's used, it's a place of pilgrimage still, but there's always controversy surrounding it. I don't know if you saw last year, at the winter solstice last year, there were pro-Palestinian banners put up by people, from the stones to the sea. Palestine will be free. I don't know if you saw that. So it's always a place that people go. It's like a lightning rod for Britain. And in the book I made, the chapter is called Stonehenge as a Mirror, because we see ourselves within it, and we give it all this meaning, and we sort of define ourselves with it as a nation. So for me, that's a great thing to play with, especially because it's such a mystery. No one really knows what it was there for. I mean, we have a very good idea. We probably know 5% of what happened there. And so during the Olympic year, I made an inflatable Stonehenge called Sacrilege. I got the criticism in first. But weirdly, only one person criticised it, an artist who was absolutely horrified by the thought of doing this, and even the Druids liked it. They came to see it in Marlborough. We did it in Marlborough, which is as close as we could get to Stonehenge, because the English Heritage were very wary of it. And we got to Marlborough and had it on the common there, Marlborough Common, and some Druids turned up and were beside themselves. They were so happy. I thought they'd come up with ceremonial swords and just cut it apart, but not at all. They got it as well. They got the humour and why it was a good thing to do. It turns young people, children, onto archaeology, but also it's a way of playing with history and playing with what can be quite pompous history at times if you're not careful. And I think playing with history is good. I think countries where you can't play with the history are probably not countries you'd ever want to live in. And so I think it was important to do that. Also, it was also something to do with the Olympics was coming, and there's all these stories about how terrible it was going to be. And in a way, those big sporting events are full of pomposity and nationalism, and I wanted something that was about national identity but was fun and show that you can, have fun with it and have a laugh with your own history. But then, of course, you do get images like this. This young boy, I've learned very quickly that if you ever turned up to it, you'd be asked to jump up and down for the press, local press or whatever, which is like a horrible thing to be asked to do. So I started asking local gymnastics teams to turn up and just like fly on it effectively and just do tumbling and somersaults and all sorts. And that's what's happening here. But you ended up with very interesting images like this. of almost a levitating body. So maybe the spiritual aspect is still there in these images, these sort of accidental images almost. And then there's misbehaviour, of course. This is in Wales. You know, you can't do that at Stonehenge. You're not even meant to do it on this one. But these young people, especially the gymnasts, are like all over the structure. So it toured Britain, then it toured London, then it went around the world. So it was a great thing to have done, and almost overwhelmingly positive, to the point where it's quite disturbing to see how much people enjoyed it. And really, wherever you went, the reaction was the same. Wherever you went in the world, people were just happy to be on it and thought it was fun. So that was an incredible thing to do. This is at Stonehenge. This is a druid, Merlin, his name is. And this was during a celebration I was asked to help with to celebrate the 100th anniversary of it being in public ownership, of Stonehenge being in public ownership, because it was on private land before. And the Druids asked if they could come and do a ceremony, and which of course you can't say no to that. And it was actually very interesting seeing them, because they weren't a big organised group. There was about 12 people, all wearing different things. The only person really dressed up was Merlin properly. There's a guy at the back who's got something on, but it's slightly half-hearted compared to Merlin. And what was incredible was that the ritual of a service they did was quite short, and it was very sincere. And it was quite moving, actually. And I was with some archaeologists, and archaeologists on the whole are kind of up for it in terms of this sort of thing, I find, because they're trying to get clues as to how maybe Stonehenge was used at the time. And so this sort of thing maybe fills in the odd gap, but also for them, I think they like the fact that it's still being used in some way. Some obviously probably hate it, but the ones I knew were kind of into it. I made some T-shirts. The next one is my favourite. I didn't make enough of them. I should make them again. It's just a big, good space for an artist. You know, where the meaning is not known, you have all that space to work in and to move around effectively. Also, within archaeology is not about the past. Archaeology actually is about the present and the future. And so there's likewise, we're talking about Stonehenge and about the identity of the country, and then when you have discoveries about like this, I think this might be Cheddar Man. These are from DNA of bones found in the UK. So there's a 10,000-year-old bones. We extrapolate that and work out what this person actually looked like, and we come up with this. And of course, this became hugely controversial in certain places. You can go on far right websites if you want. Maybe you do anyway, I don't know. And then you'll see this image is used quite a lot. This is the Anatolian woman who was found quite close to, the bones were found quite close to Stonehenge. And so you have always, like I said, the ancient history is about now, and it's about us and our future. So I've incorporated archaeology into a lot of things. I incorporated it into my show in Venice when I did the British Pavilion. I made an exhibition basically about mythology and contemporary mythology. So there you have a hen harrier with a Range Rover in its claws. That's a very big painting. You can't really tell, but it was meant to be so big that you'd see it as you walked the pavilion. So you see it from 100, 200 feet away. So the show begins outside. On the banners, I searched for form and land. For years and years I roamed. Does anyone know what that's from? No? I thought there's some pop culture people. There's people old enough to know what that's from here. I'm quite disappointed. It's A Man Who Sold the World by David Bowie. Which sounds like it's from the Bible, doesn't it? That's what I liked about it. So you had that, the hen harrier. Why the hen harrier? Well, Prince Harry and a mate of his had killed two about 10 years previously. They'd shot them out of the sky. There it is in the background. And they weren't prosecuted because the carcasses couldn't be found. But there were two witnesses, including a wildlife officer, It was in Norfolk, what's the stately home in Norfolk the Queen used to live in? Sandringham. Quite bad planning. There's a wildlife sanctuary next to the Sandringham estate. So 2 of these very rare birds were seen by a wildlife officer being shot out of the sky from the Sandringham estate. And so that room is about power, and there is archaeological artifacts within it, but it's about power and corruption in Britain. And as part of the Biennale, we had on that table, you can't really see it, those boys are actually handling hand axes. There's a smooth hand axe and there's a rough hand axe, which is about 320,000 years old, not made by someone you'd class as a human as we know it, basically. It's a different kind of classification. And so we had that just as a sort of table to get in touch with literally the deep past. I've got a little bit about working with Fraser, but he sort of talked about it, but I will talk about it. I used to make a lot of posters a long time ago, design them up myself. And as an artist, you often you get asked to do things at short notice sometimes, or fundraisers and stuff like that. Not that I want to talk about my work for charity, obviously, but the fundraisers and things I do. And I was asked during lockdown, as you can tell, because there's a queue, to come up with a campaign to commemorate or mark the fact that it was Human Rights Day on the 10th of December, as it is every year. And then we came up with a campaign with a very simple quote. It is World Human Rights Day in Xinjiang province in China, 10th of December. And we just found quite easy to do, as you can imagine, places all over Europe, South America, and the rest of the world where human rights were being infringed in some way. I mean, obviously the choice is endless, but there was a place in the UK, in America, and then in other places, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and so on. And China, of course. And that just went up all over Britain. What was great during lockdown was that there was a lot of advertising space that wasn't being used. And so you could really take over whole areas. This is one of the prime sites in London. It's Broadway Market. It's the most trendy hellhole you could ever visit down there, you know, especially in the summer. It didn't ever used to be like that, only recently. And so you have this huge poster at the end of Broadway Market, and it's really one of the prime spots. I love putting things up in public. I like posters in public as well as making art in public. I think something doesn't really exist until it's put up in public, frankly. You can have as many things on your phone as you want, but unless it's on the streets, then it doesn't exist in my mind. You know, it's like, for me, you can have stuff online, but if it's not on the telly, then it's not real. So that's why I live. For me, telly is the real world compared to the virtual world. So this, for me, is the sort of the ultimate thing, really, to have posters up in the street. And we've just had a few, I'll show it to you in a minute, but I did a show a few years ago of work made, not exclusively with Fraser, because some of them are not, some of them are pre-Muggeridge, as I'll call them, PM, and but a lot of them were. And I just did an exhibition of like 30 years of sort of printed production. So, for example, I'll just show you a few things. This one here, that looks like a mask, doesn't it? Or a face, a slightly angry face. It's actually a tax avoidance scheme by Tesco's in Hungary called transfer pricing. And that's the diagram for it. But actually a lot of these diagrams look like faces. So I made a few of those. I made a banner of one as well. The vote thing is Stonehenge saying vote. So welcome to the shit show that Fraser showed you earlier. That was an insert in a sort of daily magazine for the Frieze Art Fair. And it was just at the point where Boris Johnson, I hate to say that word, was having a lot of problems as Prime Minister. It looked like he might have to resign because he was losing votes everywhere. And it was like political chaos in Britain, even more than usual in 2019, I think it was. And so it was like welcoming people from abroad with this poster. I did want it at Heathrow Airport as you arrived, you know, had that. But weirdly, Burberry had the spot and they weren't going to give it up. That's another one. We did that in the street. That's basically the size of the street size poster we did. It's a play on words, obviously, and it's just like advertising is often a play on words. It's punning, it's use of English in a funny way, but that went up all over Britain for like a day or two. But I don't have to just explain what it means to you. This is something we've just done. It's a series of posters. Well, this poster, we've been swimming in shit, and it's basically an election poster without making it clear it's an election poster. I did a poster that said "strong and stable my arse" a few years ago when Theresa May called an election, and the electoral group, I don't know what it's called even. I got a letter from the government effectively saying you need to say who you are because you're doing election posters. We don't know who you are and who's funding you. Or you've got to take all the posters down. But this isn't explicitly about the election, but of course it is. It's kind of metaphorical and literal work. So this is just, I'm just showing a few works that we've done in the last month, and our output, my output with Fraser, can take many forms. But it's been a busy month. But I mean, I've probably done about 100 things with him, maybe more actually, maybe 150 in the last 10 years, maybe at least that. Certainly done a lot of books. So this is a work that's actually in a museum in a university in Cremona, where this is the sort of centre of violin production in the world and cello production. And it's, it's obvious what it is, isn't it? It's just a cello case just put to one side in a museum. But it's actually telling you a story about Europe and about history in the last 10 years. If you look at it, there's actually a kind of narrative that goes through it. It's about where this cellist, where he or she has been in the last 10 years on tour, in Russia, in Ukraine, all over the place, the Olympic opening ceremony and so on. There's COVID is there. It's sort of a biography of a person and an instrument through stickers. Also, those cello cases look like bodies as well. This is we've just been in Australia, and we were asked at very short notice to do an exhibition, and I just thought, we had a very short conversation. I can't remember who had the idea, but before we'd done these turning forms, and for an exhibition, and I just thought, why don't I just do a retrospective of sorts of just things that turn around? It was in a shopping centre, so the aesthetic of the building where it was in was quite unusual and quite specific, as you can see. It reminded me of the kind of shows I would have done 30 years ago, when you turn up somewhere and you just do the show in the shop or in someone's flat or whatever. So it had that feel to it. It was quite rough and ready. And we did something there. I don't know what the sound is like this. You might want to turn the sound down, because this is just what they looked like as they went round. So I don't know if you saw what was going on there. I'm going to go back. Hopefully, not going to. That's a candle of Rupert Murdoch that I made for Australia a few years previously. Made a life-size candle of Murdoch and his son, and they burnt over a period of 12 hours, and that's a test burn. On the other side to that, there was an image of Queen Victoria from a museum in India, where she'd had someone had taken a hammer to her face and just like smashed it in. And so they were together. These, weirdly, Freedom Technologies Estate, that's from the Acid House film. Well, I just showed you a part of the dance music film. And that was a sort of graphic we had when we were introducing sections about power and technology and people and what happens when they come together. So it was sort of a moving retrospective, as I called it. I'll show you another thing. Does anyone here Rambler? You're very quiet. You're worse than an art school. I did a project in Edale, in the Dales. Not so far from here, are they? And I was thinking about, they have one phone box there. And I was thinking about all the sex worker cards that were put up in phone boxes in London. I don't know if you remember those. Obviously not. And often they had these quite amazing drawings. A lot about fetishism and BDSM and everything. And I thought, well, you know what? Rambling is a properly perverted as well. And all the clothes that people wear, and the boots and the straps and the laces and the bits and bobs, there's a big fetishism around Ramblers clothes. So I thought, I'm going to make some sort of perv cards for Ramblers. So there you go, you see them there, like, you can walk all over me, come see my peaks, I've got all the gear, we love it outdoors, and just these sort of quite simple drawings of the equipment and sort of legs and things like that, as an homage to the sex workers cards. And the phone number, you rang it up. This was a project with Jarvis Cocker, and he would read out a text about radical rambling that was basically about Kinder Scout, in a sort of very sultry voice, about the benefits of walking, basically. So you can have fun. Well, I think you can. Anyway, this is a bit of Muggeridge here. This is a film I made called Putin's Happy in 2019. I spent over a period of about 2 months, I went to Parliament Square half a dozen times, maybe a bit more, to talk to people on the far right about why they were there. Do you remember 2019 when everyone would, when they'd do piece to camera, the sort of politicians and the journalists, and behind there'd be like flags and bells ringing and people shouting and screaming. Do you remember that? A horrible, weird time. Well, I went down there basically on certain days when I know there were votes and things were happening, and just talked to people. Basically, I talked to people on the right or far right who were there, who were very angry about Brexit not being done properly, to try and get in their minds, really, get in their heads about what it was they were angry about and why they were angry and what happened to them maybe to make them like that. Because some of these people I've talked to reminded me of family members, and so I wanted to so I had a kind of sympathy with them in a way, because they're people that I sort of knew, types of people that I knew. And so I, and sometimes with a cameraman, sometimes not. It's better to go without lots of people. They're super suspicious of the media. You couldn't say you were from any mainstream media at all. Weirdly, I was making the film for an Austrian exhibition, or an exhibition in Austria, which they sort of liked, because I think they just assumed that Austria was like very far right, and so that was okay. But it was really trying to sort of get into heads and see how white people really had been radicalised over time. It was an incredibly dispiriting experience, but it was fascinating at the same time. So, there's a lot of people there who were constantly filming. That guy was on Facebook Live all the time. A lot of these people I've since seen at anti-vax demos, at statue demos, at other demos. I think they were massively radicalised by Brexit, and are now just carrying on that radicalisation by going to other events. So, as well as that, I met some young people who I hope I'm going to show you some footage of. I just want to check. Yes, I am. Thank God for that. I met some young people. You can't make a film about people like that. It's unwatchable if it's just that. I mean, literally, it's unwatchable. And it's actually not a film that you can watch alone either. It's called Putin's, like I said, it's called Putin's Happy. It's about 40 minutes long. It's incredibly bleak. And but during the film, of course, you talk to people who aren't like that. And this is a group of young people from London. They reminded me of the young people I've worked with on the film, and the rave film, because they were so positive. A lot of the people on the right, far right people, were just so down on Britain. Like I said, it's not like it was. It's much better, the war, this, that, and the other. I remember, all this sort of weird stuff was said. I remember Britain before Europe, whatever that means. All those kind of phrases were said. So but this is a kind of an amazing moment in the film, which I'm going to show you. And afterwards, this is another element. This was the last day I filmed. It was like a rally of the far right. It would have been our January the 6th moment, potentially. It's about 20,000 people, maybe 30,000 in central London, all 2 stages. There's the right-wing stage and the far-right stage, effectively, Tommy Robertson stage, and then the Conservative stroke Farage stage. And everyone spoke. And there's 2 pipe bands came from Scotland to perform, and people following them. Football hooligans turned up in a big en masse. I mean, it was an incredible day. And that's in the film. Well, I won't show you that. What I will show is the next slide is of the young people. And then afterwards, it goes into a kind of piece of musical blasphemy, which, well, some of you will find very upsetting in some ways, or funny and upsetting simultaneously. What's good about watching this film as a group is that you can laugh at things that if you watched it by yourself, you wouldn't be laughing. But the sound is terrible, by the way, on this bit.
What happened? Okay, so basically, we were singing this chant down there, and where they were fighting, and this old lady told us that to go back to our country, and I was just like, yeah, normally if people say this, I actually don't get hurt, but I actually got hurt by that, because I was born and bred here. I'm from Manchester, I'm from London as well. Like, this is actually... This is racism.
Our nation too.
It's our nation too. Like, we might be brown, but we are British too. Not everyone who's white is. I'm a British Pakistani, so we need to express that as well.
Have you ever protested before?
No.
We are now.
We are now, and I've enjoyed it so much. It's like it's been an amazing day. Yeah.
What do you like about it?
I like the fact that people actually come up to you and actually want to talk to you. The people are actually getting involved. I never thought there would be so much involvement. Like, there's actually people coming in.
Bring the community together.
Have you had any good discussions?
Yeah, so many. And people are just so nice.
Are you worried about the future of Britain and your role with it?
Of course we are.
Yeah.
It affects us.
It's our future too.
We're the people that are living in this afterwards. Everyone's going to die away.
We're the youngest. Did you find after the vote at all that people became more racist to you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
definitely. Because they saw they got their way out of it with the vote, so they thought they could express their racism. Now that the country's leaving the EU, they could be more openly racist, because that's what the people wanted. So they thought.
I've actually heard so many people's opinions, and there are like there's change happening. Yeah. So yeah.
The change is coming.
Change is coming.
The change is coming.
He's so famous. Come on, say something.
Hi, I'm Femi. We're here outside Parliament. Brexit's falling apart, and everybody can see that. Even people who voted for it absolutely hate it. Let's get a new vote.
Get young people more involved. Yes.
Exactly. Our future, our choice.
Yes. It's our nation too.
That was a group there all the time, and I interviewed one of the people afterwards, the woman who was sort of in a wheelchair, and about her life. And you know, the conversations would start quite interestingly about healthcare and housing, that her kids can't live near to where she lived because of the price of houses, and then it went, you know, downhill from there, basically about asylum seekers being given flats there and houses where she lived and all that. And but again, that woman who I spoke to talked about things being better before the EU, and even though she was probably my age, and you'd have no memory of that, basically. I don't think you'd have, not being in Europe. Basically said, I enjoyed my childhood, that's what she was saying. And then, of course, there's the conspiracy theories on the backs of on the vests and so on. But, yeah, but they would terrorise people, that group in particular, some of them would terrorise the anti-Brexit people because they were very good at knowing what the law was in terms of what you could say to people, what you couldn't say to people, and just like very tough people who the police would just have to follow around all the time because of their behaviour. I never saw any violence at all, but I saw a lot of violent sort of rhetoric and sort of performative, violent behaviour in terms of like people threatening people. But it was deeply unpleasant. Just to make it even more unpleasant, this is someone I should have spoken to, but weirdly was a bit wary of talking to. he was at the last day of this sort of far right event, and he's covered clearly in tattoos all over his head as well. A lot about the Crusades. And he's covered in tattoos of numerology and codes, biblical references. He had 2 dates on him, basically, both of which, maybe by chance, were of days where civilians had been killed by soldiers, one in Northern Ireland and one in Iraq. And I suspect he was sort of supportive of that behaviour. I'm sure a lot of you know what 88 means. That's HH, 8th letter of the alphabet. It's Heil Hitler. So, I mean, he was like the real deal. Like I said, I didn't talk to him. But, probably a better filmmaker would have talked to him and followed him home, or gone home with him and filmed him and done a documentary about this one person and tried to decode his whole body. But as soon as I saw this, I knew I had to do this in the film. I had to basically stop the film, and there's a sort of 1 minute section, maybe more. We'll just go around what I filmed of him in terms of like the tattoos on his body that I could see at least. I'm not going to talk about folk art. I'm going to show you some. I did an exhibition of folk art in 2004 with a colleague. We actually did it in 2000, of all kinds of creativity and vernacular and folk art around Britain. And never have I had such a negative response from the press. To the point where one writer said, "I can't believe I'm having to review this rubbish." I mean, in print. And yet it was a hugely successful, successful as in popular exhibition. So Michael Jackson's Scarecrow that we had in the show. I mean, I even daren't say it, but I was saying as I'm at Leeds, we had a scarecrow. We had a Jimmy Savile scarecrow at Tate Britain. This was 2000, so it's knowing about him at least. So it's quite interesting that the 2 scarecrows we had in the show, one was Michael Jackson, one was Jimmy Savile. So all this behaviour, all this amazing looking behaviour, I think is very influential to artists, to contemporary artists, even if they might not want to admit it. And it's very funny as well. This is World Gurning Championship, where you make yourself look as ugly as you can without manipulating your face with your hands. And you have to basically, it's pulling a face. And we had a lot of prison art, and this is one of my favourite ones. It's a portrait of Meghan Markle. So we had. It was a real breadth of Britain. It was basically about creativity outside museums and gallery structures or art schools. Even it was about what people do anyway, and in a sense, it was a challenge to artists. I'll talk briefly about this project and then maybe talk about Iraq if I have time. But I was asked, after Augury, I never thought I'd going to do a mass participatory project again, because those opportunities don't really come up very much. Mainly because of money, to be honest, I would say, and public will. But I was asked to think about how you would commemorate, not celebrate, commemorate the Battle of the Somme during the commemorations for the First World War that happened, 1418 now it was called. So this is the middle of the war, effectively, 1916, July the 1st. And I was asked how I would approach that. And I thought, well, if you're going to commemorate 19,000 dead people in a morning or a day, you should do it with bodies. You shouldn't have piles of boots or poppies or whatever. I mean, I hated that poppies thing. And so I just thought, well, you just have people around Britain in full uniform just hanging out at kind of ugly Britain, as I will call it, or Britain as it is today, contemporary Britain, in places where you would never see a First World War soldier and never expect to see one. And so that's what happened. We had thousands of people, participants, who just appeared unannounced on that day, started at railway stations, that's Birmingham. So you saw a lot of people saw you basically. If you do it at a railway station, obviously you're going to have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people see the project before 9 o'clock in the morning, which is a sort of value for money thing almost. And then they just went around. They just travelled around. They were a virus. You know, it's a viral artwork in the body of the country, and hung out and got in the way of people in shopping centres and places like that. So it's the Trafford Centre in Manchester, Birmingham again. They were silent. The participants didn't speak, because as soon as you start speaking, you become a reenactor or an actor. And I didn't want that, even though a lot of people who worked with us were sort of students or trainee actors or actors even, all members of the public. I didn't want them to be acting. I wanted them to just be around, hanging out. And so they didn't speak. If you went up to one of these participants, you were given a card, which is what's happening here in Birmingham. And the card really answered more or less every question you would have had. And that's, everyone had a different card. They were representing a different person. They weren't playing that person, they were representing them. So that's one. And we made it geographically correct. So most of the people were representing people within that area, not exclusively, because it was good to mix it up a bit. And during the war, that did happen because the casualties were so high. They would end up mixing up battalions because whole villages were being decimated and whole people from factories were being killed. So the whole factory was being killed. So they had to mix them up. Otherwise, you know, the losses would have been so high for communities. But this is what happened. This is what we did. And we trained up the participants, a lot of trust exercises. I think that might be in London. And the reason we did this is because I was actually very nervous. I'm a very pessimistic person. And I thought, well, we're going to get so much shit for this from the public. People are not going to want to see this. Some people will, but some people won't. And we did it in Northern Ireland as well, which was very important to do it there. I felt that's where the art lie, in doing it in places where, or pushing the project to the point where maybe it wouldn't have gone otherwise if an artist hadn't been involved. So we went to Northern Ireland and did it in Derry and Belfast. But we had a lot of trust exercises and a lot of exercises around what would happen if someone took a piece of what you were wearing or attacked you or spat at you or whatever. In the end, none of that happened, thankfully. This is the end of the day where people en masse grouped and then walked in a vortex almost, hundreds of people, participants. That's at Waterloo Station. I don't know why it didn't happen. I think I have a theory, is that it was July the 1st, 2016. A week before, literally the week before, had been the Brexit vote. And I don't know if you remember what happened in that intervening week. It was like Cameron had resigned, and then it was the Tory party was at each other's throats, and backstabbing and all that stuff. And it was the beginning of the chaos that we still live under. And I think people were very upset, regardless of how they voted, with the sort of spectacle of that week. And so instead of people getting annoyed, we had a lot of people crying, which I wasn't expecting. I wanted to make people cry. I actually wanted to make children cry. I wanted to upset them and scare them, which didn't happen either. But we made grown-ups cry. And I think it was because people saw this, and then they thought, oh, this is what sacrifice really is. This is what Europe is. And we've just seen people sacrifice their country effectively for their careers. And this is people who sacrifice their lives for their countries. I think that was what was happening. Instinctively, people thought about Britain and about what happened with the horrible Brexit referendum. The level of discussion. And an MP had been killed as well, remember. So it was that. I think the whole thing was very much about the psychology of Britain at the time, which was very, very fragile. There's Murdoch. I did a project in Melbourne. It was unannounced, and as was this. This was unannounced because I just thought it had to happen without anyone knowing it was going to happen, and for it to be effective. Otherwise, it would have just been another thing, piece of theatre on the streets. But, you know, it's counterintuitive because when you spend millions of pounds doing something, and this costs millions of pounds, you kind of want to get the value even before you do it, get something back. But I insisted, and which is amazing. I was listened to, said it should just be a secret, and we will open it as a secret, as a battle would be, a big battle. You want to keep it a secret as much as you can. Father and son was something you saw an image of recently, just now. It happened in Australia the first day after lockdown, and this is a test from it. And it was a burning of Rupert Murdoch and Lachlan Murdoch in public in a chapel, a deconsecrated chapel, and it was a 12-hour artwork where you go and you contemplate the souls of these two people and think about them as they sort of burn in front of you. Not a particularly subtle work, but I don't really care. I'll go one more thing and then we'll finish. How's that? Yeah? Weirdly, that Murdoch thing, during lockdown, I'd made a fundraiser print for an Australian charity that was, because of the bushfires, and I'd made a print for $100 it was, which is 50 quid. And it was Fraser had done it for me or with me. It was Lachlan Murdoch's house in Sydney, his kind of beautiful mansion, on fire. It was like photoshopped. It was on fire because a bushfire was burning it down. Because, you know, Fox News had ignored it as a story for months, basically, the bushfires. And then when they did talk about it, they blamed it on environmentalists. They said they'd started the fires. So very odd. And so I thought, well, you can't, however rich you are, you'll never be able to escape climate change. And so I had his house on fire. And it just looked like a little thing, like a very simple idea. And then, quite madly, Rupert Murdoch's grandchildren wrote to me saying, how dare you do this? How dare you make this work? There could be children in that house. And these are, when I say they're grandchildren, they're like grown-ups. They're not like 7 years old. They're like proper human, you know, grown-up adults. And they couldn't tell the difference between a two-dimensional print and reality. And then all these other people piled in, all these like rich people and kind of weird YBA types, because Liz Murdoch had married an artist and his friends piled in. It was like, what is this? This is ridiculous, defending these people. And I should have kept them, but I was totally freaked out. And if any of you get stuff like that, you do get freaked out initially. And so I deleted them, which I really regret, because they would have been brilliant to put in my book, these quotes by these people. But anyway, this is the last thing I'm going to show you. It's really cheery. It's the project I made, which originally was I was asked to suggest an idea for the fourth plinth, and I suggested an idea that was shortlisted, and it's this. This is the maquette. It was going to be a car that had been destroyed in Iraq, in a civilian vehicle destroyed in Iraq during the sectarian violence, if not sort of civil war, effectively, that happened after the invasion. And it was going to rot on the plinth for like a year and a half and just be a piece of evidence from that country in London. The next image is a piece of Photoshop. It's not what happened, but it's quite convincing, actually. So it would have been something like that. That would bits would fall off and stuff, and so it was. It wasn't selected, which is not a surprise really. But I did manage to get a car from a curator had got a car out of Iraq that had been destroyed in a bomb attack, and I towed it across America from one end to the other through quite right-wing areas. This is an army-based town in California. On the side it says, this car was destroyed in a Baghdad marketplace, March 5th, 2007. And so it just basically went on a journey across America. We showed it America, and America, when we showed it to America as well. And we just parked up in places and talked to the public. So it's very low key. We didn't make a big deal of it, even though it is a big deal, if you think about it. And people just found us. They didn't know it was going to happen. And we gave out flyers, and the public came up to us and chatted. and we were kind of intrigued, and no one, we went to really quite, into Alabama, Texas, Arizona. We went to areas there. You could expect for people to be quite angry with us, but no one was, because we took with us an Iraqi citizen, this guy, who'd worked with the American Army as a translator, and an American soldier. And so we had all this breadth of experience, and we could talk more or less anyone down from being angry because there was a soldier there. This guy on the left was going to a funeral of one of his comrades, his veteran comrades, and he'd seen it and stopped, and he'd spent like an hour and a half talking to Sam about Iraq and religion. Often, most conversations ended up with religion, started with family. They weren't really very political. They were kind of cultural conversations, and then a lot of them ended up with religion and then maybe back to family. And so we had this incredible journey across America talking to people. We made films. I wanted to show you one of the films, but I couldn't upload it for some reason. It's of a guy talking about his family and what it was like to be anti-war in Memphis during the war and what that did to him and his family. It was very interesting. And then he talks about the car and says about a sense of American entitlement and so on. He's just a chef, He's not an academic or anything, but he talks very, very well about the way Americans think they're special, and then why isn't and it's no surprise that people around the world hate us when we think things like this happen in our wake. So it's an incredible speech. The car now is in London. It's on permanent display at the Imperial War Museum in their foyer, kind of atrium, I suppose you'd call it, with about 6 other vehicles and so on. But it's with the whole story of it told and where it's from. Also, its journey across America, which in a sense isn't that interesting anymore. The interesting thing is what it was, and where it's from, really. The fact that it's in a central London in a museum, I think, is really, for me, it was an end to the project, which I couldn't have asked for a better end in a way for it to still be seen. I will leave it at that. I'm going to put an image up, which we could talk about. This is a live class I did with Iggy Pop in 2016, and that's just him being drawn by a group of Americans, basically, sort of being documented effectively, because, of course, that's the most important male body in the world, possibly. It's definitely it's the only male body that we've seen for 50, 60 years and go through different stages. So it's very unusual to see that, isn't it? And so this is a project I did. And it's about art history as well. But I'll leave it at that because it's 11:30. I know we've got to finish around 12, haven't we? So I'll take questions if there are any. So to answer your question, I think it was to do with a lot of things. I think it was to do with a generation of art critics who brought up with conceptual art and were not used to it wasn't a messy show because we'd installed it in a very clean, kind of beautiful way. We didn't want to install it like just chucking stuff up because that's what people would expect, to show lack of respect to work. Everything was framed and it was presented as art, I think. Maybe that's what frightened them, because we framed things and things were on nice monitors, films, and in vitrines. So that was a threat. I think there's a class element. It's kind of mainly working class people making things, maybe middle class as well, but also they didn't know who the makers were. So there's no biographical content that they could lean on. And there's no history there. They didn't know what these people had done before they'd done that or what they'd done after. So in a way they were sort of they were bereft of information that they would usually use when talking about an artist's work, because they always talk about what they've done before, what shows they've been in, they'd have that context. There's no context for them in an contemporary art sense. So it sort of came from nowhere. And so some critics just crumpled. It just totally sort of, probably had sort of minor nervous breakdowns, not knowing how to talk about things made by the public. But it was very interesting because the reviews were so bad, they were kind of amazing. And they're very personal against me, saying, this person's just exploiting people. But, that's always the go-to thing, is that you're exploiting people by working with them, which is ridiculous. So it was unusual. I mean, now there's a lot more shows like this. There's one coming up actually quite soon. Art Angel are doing one about hobbies, and because there is a crossover between hobbies and art, and so that will be, I'm sure that will be seen in a very different light now. I think the world has moved on. I think the public loved it, but I think the art critics were just a bit behind the public, as the media often is behind the public. We saw that when Tate Modern opened and contemporary art. They were still sneering at art, often, you know, on news pages when the public were flocking to galleries. I mean, that's a simplification, but I think that really is what happened. People really got behind contemporary art and were interested in it, and journalists had to sort of catch up with the public mood. Miss their support. I will miss their support. The question was, I've had 14 years of Tory government. Will I miss their support? Massively. It's going to be terrible when they go, isn't it? It's going to be awful. Next question. I think that was a trick question. I've got a feeling that was a my documentarial transformation of the material. I think the film I made in Parliament Square is a documentary, basically. And I've made relatively straightforward documentaries. I made one about Depeche Mode fans, and I've made a few other films. But within it, I suppose, the one about Depeche Mode fans was definitely about transformation. It was about a kind of religious experience of music for people, so kind of a spiritual element of music and relics and so on. So in a way, I'm quite consistent in what I'm interested in, but you can watch a lot of the things I do as documentaries. They might be a bit unconventional in ways, but you know, I watched some documentaries the other day, some sort of from the 70s, and they don't have voiceover a lot of the time. Mine don't. I don't like that, and they don't have like big intros about what this documentary is about. It just goes straight into it, and I really like that. And they hold shots for a long time. So, for example, that shot of the woman playing Bob Marley, that's quite a long shot, but it's very revealing as well, I think. It's about a minute. I think if someone was making a documentary for telly about that, they'd cut that down and say it's too long. People aren't going to watch that. But actually I do. It's fascinating watching them. And then it pans around to the pro-Europe people looking very cowed by it, almost intimidated by it. But I did show the film I'd made in Parliament Square to someone at Channel 4, and I said, would you ever show this? He said, there's absolutely no way we could show a film like this because it has no narrative to it. There's no voiceover. You don't know where it's coming from and who's made it. You don't know what's going on, and there's no resolution at the end. It's just like, it's a mess in a sense, and it is, because it was a mess there. It was a visual and oral mess, basically, and so is the film. But it probably gives you a good idea of what it was like to be there, because it was so confusing and sort of disturbing at the same time, what people were saying and doing. And I spoke to one person on one day, on the sort of I call like sort of the fascist day, which was the last day. Just by chance, he had a weird flag. I said, "What's your flag?" And he went into this 15-minute conspiracy theory about the royal family and about hydropower in New Zealand, and then it went in currencies, and it just got deeper and deeper and deeper into like this just bizarre sort of stories. And so that was the one person I spoke to. So everywhere you looked and went, there was stuff going on and strange things and odd insignia and people meeting and stuff like that. It was incredible. Well, it wasn't commissioned by the BBC. No, it was you saw it on the BBC. I basically I gave it to the BBC. I said, "Do you want to show this?" It took them about a year to actually show it for some reason, but it was like a gift, effectively. But they didn't want to. It was. I don't want to go into like slag the BBC off, but the guy at BBC 4, he said, "We've already done dance music. We don't need to do it again." And then I said to someone at BBC, if I'd have set it on a steam train, they'd have bloody shown it on telly, wouldn't they? Like in 2 seconds. But anyway, but they did show it. And it was the highest rated documentary that year they showed, with highest approval ratings with these people under 40, which for them, no one under 40 watches BBC 4, especially now when they don't actually have any original output. So it was, after that, they were all over me trying to get me to do a whole series of films made in schools of experts going into schools and talking to young people about using the format, but it all fizzled out because of COVID. I wanted to do it. I wanted to do one about disinformation and then something about video games and the real, the subtext behind these things and open source intelligence gathering and stuff like that for young people. But anyway. Aftershock of the reenactment, well, like I said, what we didn't do is what you do now. You'd have tent upon tent afterwards in the field where people went back to sort of talk to people about their experience. We should have filmed the queue, but local community. Well, I saw most of the people that took part about 4 months later when we had a film screening, and they were very. And then they came to London as well there's a kind of premiere in London. So that was my contact. I wasn't on email at that time, and most of the guys that took part weren't on email either. So we weren't in contact the way you are in contact with people a lot now. It's possible that some people, that experience of doing that really freaked them out and upset them. But to be honest, most of those people were upset anyway about it. It's not as though it left them. It didn't bring back bad memories. The bad memories were with them all the time. And so I think, to be honest, they'd been through worse because they'd been through that day originally in '84. But I think for a lot of them it was, I think they did enjoy just meeting their mates again and being with them and talking about stuff. And being filmed and it being made into a documentary which was shown on telly because it was in 2001, it's pre 9/11, so like a world that you can only imagine in a way, if you weren't there. Height of New Labour, where the miners' strike might as well have happened 3,000 years ago. It was just never mentioned. It was just forbidden. And so for someone, even though I was from London, to come and say, right, we're going to make a documentary prime time, Channel 4, we're going to spend a lot of money doing this and pay everyone about what happened to you, I think they appreciated just the attention and the fact that I told them that I'm telling it from it's not going to be neutral as a film. I'm going to tell it from your perspective. The reenactors had someone looking after them who was like the wrangler. He was the guy that got in touch with the reenactors, and he told the reenactors, and I think he believed it, that it was going to be a neutral reenactment, and a non-political reenactment, he told them, which is like ridiculous because it's impossible. Which I was happy for him to say that because I couldn't have told him that because that would have been a lie. Because of course it's political. It was a piece of political performance art. But they saw it as just being part of a documentary, but it wasn't. It was an artwork primarily, and the film funded the artwork because Channel 4 paid for it. Well, a lot of people paid for it, Channel 4 mainly. Oh, so we had 900 to 1,000 participants, and we were always going to mix up. So some reenactors were going to play miners, some miners were going to play reenactment. But what happened was, and I think they probably stressed that, the day before we had a rehearsal and the weather was terrible. It was a classic grim summer's day, like 8 degrees and raining on a field. Yeah, it was even colder the day before. That was like a nice day. And then it was miserable and we didn't get to do the second half. So that's why the second half was so good, because it was unrehearsed and it was a chaos. And apparently a miner, a former miner, playing himself effectively, threw a punch, and it might have hit someone but didn't, but nearly did. And the reenactors were very nervous anyway about the former miners. And I think they have just paranoia and anxiety over it meant that they just thought, oh, that was a real punch, wasn't it? Even though it wasn't. I suspect. I really do suspect that. They just brought a verite to it that no one else could. And so, ironically, that night, all the heads of the reenactment groups had a meeting, which we didn't film, and I wasn't present at, with the organisers, and they threatened to go on strike if we didn't get more former miners playing police. So we had to move more people over because the reenactors were terrified that they were going to be like beaten in a battle, even though they were outnumbering them with shields and uniforms and whatnot, 2 to 1. They thought that like it was going to end up as a proper revolutionary moment, and it was going to spark the sort of like revolutionary workers' party revolution in Britain. I mean, those words were used. I mean, it was that sort of kind of political naivety they had, or some of them had, which was really fascinating. But that wasn't in the film. That wasn't to be filmed in the film. Well, I think you're right. I think, like I said, because it was New Labour, and the council were not happy of this doing. It was a Lib Dem council in Sheffield at the time. They were really not into what we were doing, but they couldn't stop us. The police weren't into it. We had to close a road. They didn't like it either, for obvious reasons. I can understand that more. I mean, it was 17 years past, but I think, you know, we were trying to look forward, weren't we, with New Labour, or the council was trying to look forward and just forget the past, not address it, just forget it. And I think a lot of people were very angry about that. And, you know, the strike was never mentioned in the media. Only became, so in a way I was trying to do something, maybe it wasn't an anniversary, it was 17 years, it wasn't 20 years, so it didn't even have an anniversary moment to it, which would make sense in people's minds. But I suspect it was maybe to do with that, that no one had really come up and wanted to talk about it in depth and make a film about it in depth. Obviously, just after the strike, just like after the Second World War, there's like loads of books and films about the war. Often, you know, with the strike, there's amazing books written by villages or individuals in villages about their times. There's a lot of self-published material, which is incredible, and first-hand accounts. And that's what I went to first, really. And then a police report, a very good police report by South Yorkshire Police about, you know, policing the strike and mistakes that were made, you know, that kind of thing. And community relations and so on. That was really helpful. But, yes, it wasn't in the national discussion, was it, in the way that it is now. It was on the radio this morning even. So it was not a safe moment. It wasn't quite far enough away maybe to be spoken of, which is why I'm glad I did it then rather than 20 years. And also these guys were getting older and they had to sort of run around a field and then be pursued and so on. So you couldn't do it now for people. They'd be at least my age, would be like 60 minimum maybe. It's about what you value and what should be valued, I think. And but it was something I remember. It's a very personal work, really. It was about something that I'd seen, and so I was making it for myself, effectively. But it was with a huge budget. I was very lucky to be able to do that. But I think you're right. It's about what's valued, and I think Britain has changed in that way. I think we're much more interested in people's stories and people's narratives than they were maybe 25 years ago. I think that's to do with the loosened grip of newspapers on our lives as setting agendas. In the art world, a good review was everything, or a bad review was like a disaster, it could ruin your career. It's just not the case anymore. And I think that maybe with the media as they were, I know it sounds a bit conspiracy theory, but they thought, well, this is not good, Morris dancing is stupid, then Morris dancing is stupid. And so that's fragmented now, hasn't it? They can't have that control over taste and culture that they once did, or politics even. So, which is a good thing. But I think the control over information and people's opinions is just not what it was. So, now Morris dancing is the coolest thing you can do. It certainly wasn't when we were doing the thing. It was like seen as like this bizarre, sort of perverted thing. And it's interesting. I gave a talk somewhere. It was a bit like this, and I was showing images from the folk archive, and someone was criticising it in those terms. This is stupid. Morris dancing, all that. And I said, well, I don't think it is. And I said, well, where are you from? Because it was like a conference. I said, I'm from the BBC. I said, oh, right. I said, I bet if you went to Catalonia and saw people do Morris dancing, you think it was the coolest thing in the world. But if you saw it in Britain, you're ashamed of it for some reason, or embarrassed by it. It kind of says your sort of relationship to maybe working class culture, or something like that. I remember sort of quite enjoying that moment. But I think a lot is to do with my upbringing, going to things and watching, enjoying, seeing that kind of thing, and just thinking this is great and influencing me and wanting to share it effectively. Well, I need to correct you there. That was a show of folk art, historical show of folk art that I didn't curate. It wasn't the folk archive. It's something entirely different. Apologies. Yeah. So that's fine. 20. I know what it's like to be 20. It's fine. So I didn't do that. The show wouldn't have been sponsored by BP, but BP gave money to Take Britain. So it wasn't sponsored by BP. So that's two things. Third thing, I know, ideally, of course, every show should be free. But if you work in a museum, you see how museums work, and we have very little money, really, to survive, even in London, which is kind of amazing. You know, if they're struggling in London, you know that outside of London they're in real straits. They shouldn't charge that much, I'd agree, you know, but what can you do? I mean, I think that, especially a show like that, could have been much cheaper. It's sort of counterproductive. When we first showed the Folk Archive, actually, in 99 or 2000, it was in a big group show where they charged, and no one went to it because it wasn't a particularly interesting exhibition. So, you know, for me, that's always a problem. And I think museums, though, big museums in London should find a way of charging people who are not from Britain to go into the museums, which is, I know it's controversial and slightly right-wing, but I think it's time, really. Rather than take 50 million quid from BP, maybe they should take 50 million quid from Chinese, Indian, European tourists, because we pay when we go to those places. I can't think of a single museum I've been to recently abroad where I haven't had to pay, and I'm quite happy to pay. So I think, but that's totally different from what we were talking about. Sorry, that's just something. Well, I think you want what emotion? I suppose you want what type of emotion? It depends on the work, but I suppose you want people to sort of have an out-of-body experience, which I know is quite a lot to ask, isn't it? Really, but to maybe forget where they are or what's happening and just see the world a little bit differently for a period of time, not necessarily forever, but like for a bit. That sort of lose, not think about other things, not thinking of looking at a phone because you're entranced by something or into something. That would be nice. I actually wasn't thinking about the people I've worked with. I was thinking more like myself, really. You know, it's based on the Warhol quote. In the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. But I think our fate now, in this point in time in history, is that you might be famous, but you'll probably be cancelled as well at the same time, or we will be cancelled for saying something wrong or doing something wrong. It's just like it's just the state of affairs as they are now. I mean, it's meant to be funny, really. I mean, you could take it quite seriously as well, because you know it could happen. It could happen today, couldn't it? The culture wars of. Think about cancelling. I know it's really kind of to do with social media, but cancelling has been going on for years. You know, News of the World, The Sun were cancelling people by revealing them to be having affairs or doing this, that, or the other, or saying things or taking drugs. That was cancel culture of like the most extreme kind, wasn't it? You know, when they were doing that to footballers or whatever, entrapping them, buying coke, doing all of that. At the same time, Jimmy Savile's just doing whatever he wants with children and no one's touching him or knowing about it. And it's like those papers probably knew what was going on. They couldn't be bothered. They were just more interested in some sort of 21-year-old footballer. And so cancel culture is basically the right-wing media construct, isn't it? It's an invention, not a construct. It's a real thing. It's an invention.
But also the right-wing, especially in Europe, looking around Europe and, you know, the person on the right is talking about cancel culture.
Yeah, because they feel they're under attack, don't they? Because people are just criticising them and they think they're being cancelled. So, but we know that's not the case. If only, yeah? If only Nigel Farage had been cancelled properly, and you know, and sort of revealed, and sort of someone done deep research on him and his relationship to Russia or whatever, all those things, and Assange, you know, that's all that stuff. I think it could be very interesting. Any work related to the M25? No, I haven't. I mean, there are works related to the there's some very good work related to the M25. There's like a continuous film of someone driving around it. I mean, it's the most obvious thing in a way. But in the film that I showed you that trailer of, there is talk of the M25 in the film. But I haven't done an artwork related to that. You've got 15 seconds. You want it now.
I'm not going to ask a question, thank you. But I suppose on behalf of Leeds Beckett and everyone here, thank you for an amazing presentation and a great sort of insight into your practice. So thank you very much, Jeremy.